So there's this adage that says, don't talk about religion or politics unless you want to get in trouble. Well, this series is all about religion, so we might as well go rest of the way today and talk about politics. Welcome to What Do You Mean God Speaks? I am Paul Sungho-jung, and this is the third post-season episode of Season 3, Vote for a Person, Not a Party. Some biblical reasons why we should do that some of the times. My default principle when I discuss any topic is that I stay with the things that I actually know at least something about, which are the insights, ideas, and stories in Christianity, and more generally speaking, philosophy and religion. If I stray beyond that, I should say so quite clearly and why. So the previous bonus episode and this one is me breaking this default by straying outside, which is why I'm making sure that you know that. But you may be asking, why are you going off your regular topics? I mean, no one said that to me, but there are probably some people thinking that I should just stop with these social or political issues, which I know no more than an average person, and go back to my regular content. But hear me out. Firstly, we are between seasons, and we are still on time, mostly, to start the fourth season by the end of this year. And in the meanwhile, it may be good to listen to how I think aloud on topics outside my area. I mean, we all think about stuff that we don't know, right? But I'm trying to draw these thoughts from the kinds of insights and ideas that we explore in the main episodes of this series. But which insight, you ask? Well, one of the important ideas that's being presented in this series is the call to examine who we are and what we are becoming as persons. We are called, to use the old phrase, to look within our souls. Now, we can leave the more metaphysical connotations of the word soul for later seasons. But looking within our souls is not at all about looking only at ourselves, closed off from the outside world. After all, as a 20th century philosopher Heidegger would put it, we are always connected and engaged with the world around us. That is the nature of our existence. So to examine ourselves is to examine how each of us relates to reality as a whole. And you can probably recite the next lines by now. Reality is like a speech and unfolds like a story. So all of reality is God speaking. That's what religions like Christianity mean by God. So examining what kind of person we are is the same as examining how we relate to God. That is to say, how we engage with reality, with everything that is real, with every truth, with every living person. Do we engage in good faith, humbly, truthfully, and justly? Or do we engage in bad faith, with conceit, lies, and contempt? And this question seems to be more fundamental to the Christian Bible than the question of what results from such engagements. What do I mean by that? Well, this is the insight that this series has once phrased as the following. There is truth, then there is truth that generates other truths. There are truths that we discover and learn, and again, every truth is God speaking to us. But truth that is even more important is about what kind of person leads us to every truth by engaging reality in good faith without deceit or distortion. Such person is the closest analogy to God, or in the words of Genesis, the image of God speaking to us in our time. So in Season 3, we considered why some of the moral precepts and laws in the Bible seem to change over the centuries, such as that of, say, circumcision or slavery. And our conclusion was that a crucially important idea that the Christian Bible presents to us is how each generation arrived at such precepts and laws, which is to say, how they related to God and heard God speak to them, and so reached or received these moral precepts for their time and their generation. Our particular standard of morality or justice are always inadequate, and it can change, hopefully for the better. So what is crucial is what kind of person can bring about the things that are the most just, most fair, and most compassionate for their time. And that question, again, is that of the soul, the person and their relation to God, and thus how they engage reality. And that is why Jesus declares in the Christian Gospels, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to God my Father except through me. Notice that Jesus places the words way, that is how we engage things, and truth and life together, side by side, and identifies all of that as a person, himself. Now, there is much more to this statement than that, since Jesus here is primarily speaking about how his life, his sacrificial death and resurrection will save humanity from their sins and restore their relationship to God. But to really get into that, we'll need a few more seasons at least. So, going back, this is a core idea in Christianity. We often pay a lot of attention to the results, what the person produces, and we often miss the person themselves. But of course, I said that we are talking politics today. So let's do that. My assessment regarding how we have participated in politics and social movements of our time is that we have been captivated by the results, the products, and neglected to see the persons that produce them. Or to put it differently, I'm posing this following question to the advanced democracies of the world today. Ones that really are democracies with real elections and freedom of speech. Have we been seeking victories of our political or social causes, the products, while neglecting to examine the characters or the souls who champion them? Is that what we've been doing? Because if so, we are amplifying the greatest weakness that lies at the heart of every democracy. And this is the reason why we complain in every election cycle that we are being forced to choose the least horrific candidates rather than the best. But if I'm right, we deserve it. More than 2,000 years ago, the Greek philosopher Socrates, according to the writings of Plato, his most famous disciple, posed this criticism regarding democracy. In a democracy, a state or a society is ruled by popular opinion. But that is no way to run a state. What is needed is expertise, not popular vote. So suppose you are on a ship sailing on rough seas. Now, do you want to be on a ship where its course and direction is decided by the votes of its passengers who know nothing about running a ship? Or do you want to be on a ship that is helmed by someone who knows how to read the charts, how to navigate the ship toward a safe port, and knows how to steer? Now, Athenian democracy, to which Socrates and Plato were part of, was a different kind of democracy than ours. Everyone, or rather every eligible voter, which was male Athenian adult, cast a vote on every major decisions, like enacting laws and going to wars and such. Modern democracies, on the other hand, are forms of representative democracies. We choose representatives who will make these decisions in our place using their expertise. At least, that's what it's supposed to be. But that only places the problem further back. How do we choose our representatives, people who should know how to steer our nation? Here's another example, which is also drawn from Plato's work, again featuring Socrates. So, there's a group of children who's falling ill, and they need to choose between two persons to treat them. One person is a doctor who prescribes them with bad-tasting medicine and maybe even painful needles. The second example is from our time. The other person is a pastry chef who offers them cakes. Who they choose? The problem is that the quality of the representatives that govern a democratic society depends on the quality of the people who elect them. And I've been hearing that more and more people in contemporary democracies like that of the US are becoming concerned about the state of our democracies. Or more bluntly, we're losing trust in that institution. We don't like our leaders. We don't like the choices that we have in our election. It's becoming less and less about who we think is the best candidate and more about who we think is the least terrible, least odious. But then my question is, why are we only getting terrible candidates? Remember, the quality of our leaders, our representatives, depends on the quality of the people who elect them, us. So what's happening with us? Let me propose a following account that may explain at least a big part of the problem. Again, I'm not a sociologist or a political scientist. This is a layman's observation, but it is an observation which draws from the insights that we explored in this series. For too long, our elections have become a matter of winning, and specifically a particular political, social, or cultural position in winning. All of us likely heard the term the culture wars. Well, that is part of this, but also involved are relevant economic policies, foreign relations, infrastructure spendings, and so on. And we want our side to win. Of course, that's quite obvious. Would you want to lose instead? But see, this has consequences. Simply put, what are we willing to do to win? Are we willing, for example, to bend the truth about the issues, about ourselves or our opponents, or what's going on that may support or undermine our case? I mean, we won't spread outright lies, or so we tell ourselves, but a spin, a somewhat a faster spin on some truth, or perhaps partial truth. Except, of course, the other side calls that disinformation or fake news, though obviously it's their side that's spreading those, or so we say. I noticed, to my great annoyance, that in my newsfeed, different news outlets, different mainstream and vetted outlets present very different news now. And let's not even get to the more partisan online tabloids that keeps offending my eyes. Some news stories or facts that are covered in one outlet seem to be completely ignored by the other, as if they never happened. And even when they cover the same news, the actual content and the details regarding it are glossed over in one, while emphasized, emblazoned, and shouted atop mountains in the other. Now, some differences of views are to be expected, obviously. That's how we think and interact, and that's good. But again, my question is, what kind of persons are we becoming when we become more and more willing to spin the truth faster than we know we should, just so that our side wins? What is happening with our relation to reality, with truth, and so with God? Because if we spin the truth a bit too fast, say like a drill to pierce holes on our ship, our world may start taking on water. And yes, that is a direct reference to the episodes on the Genesis account of the flood in season 2. Then we come to actually choosing the people to represent us. What kind of persons are we increasingly attracted to? Well, there are two features that we seem to be going for that amplify our problem. First, a person who's willing to do anything to win. And second, one who will win in ways that will tear apart our opponents and put them in their place. This is what I remarked in our previous extra episode. We seem to have this tendency when we try to make our world better. We tend to do so, or we prefer to do so, by destroying the people who we think is making it worse. We seem to enjoy, especially in our polarized world, exposing and humiliating and canceling the people who we label as the people who make this world bad. And by that, we far too often mean people who we disagree with. So many of us seem to want our representatives to do just that, to win and bring down the MAGA crowd or the woke crowd, or insert whatever word of your choice here. We want our representatives to be combative, to spin the truth like a drill if they have to carry our anger and frustration, or worse, to embody our contempt at people who we think are at fault for why our world is so different from how we would like it to be. And let's not even get into the obvious point of whether the world should be how we would like it to be. And so let's say that such people win our primaries or our party conventions or so on. They are the people who will tear down those we are angry at, people who will win and deliver us the products, the law courts, policies, government actions, and impose our values and vision on the rest of our society. And we think this is all justified because we believe in the goodness of our products. But if this is what we've done, people we selected are essentially gladiators, our champions in a blood sport, or perhaps more charitably, they are showmen. But neither gladiators nor showmen are leaders. What makes them great in a blood sport or showmanship have very little to do with bringing together a society or a nation and leading us together to a better future. In fact, things may very well be much worse than this in a particularly politically charged and partisan setting where animosity toward each side runs rampant. There, darker features will become increasingly prominent in those we select, while other features, to put it bluntly, will be bred out. For example, we'll encourage unquestioning stance toward our views and uncompromising hostility toward our opponents. We'll overlook their conceit and arrogance and even approve of their contempt for the other side. We'll ignore their callous disregard for people who are quote-unquote not in our camp and even cheer when they say something like they will put those people in their place. Yet these are characteristics that belong more to people who start civil wars or political pogroms and purges. Now, note that I'm not simply saying that we will select such people to be our representatives. I'm saying that the way we do this will encourage those in politics to become such a person if they aren't already, because they will learn that those are the people who are being selected. Yes, you can say that I'm exaggerating, and I'd also like to say that this is a worst case scenario. But let me ask this question, a litmus test if you will. Let's say that you're choosing between two people to represent your political party, and they'll both be men in this example. The first person proclaims how everyone in your party, people like you, have been so deeply wronged, how everyone on the other side is bent on destroying your society or your country or the planet, and how if he's elected, they'll never so much as get a word in anymore in your government. And then the second person steps up and says the following. Now, he does agree with most of the key policies and positions of your party, but he says that the concerns and arguments of the other side are quite understandable and he wants to address those too. He even voices concern that your party has been so focused on how angry you all are at other people that the hard conversation about actual policies and governing have been ignored. Now, which of the two will be chosen as your party's candidate in the end? I mean, realistically speaking. And if it is the first person, my darker scenario may be a lot closer than we'd like to think. And if it is the first person, if that is the kind of person that all of us are choosing to champion our cause, then here is what that would mean. If we lose, the person who will have power over us will be the worst possible kind of person among those we disagree with. And if we win, they will be the worst possible kind of person among us. So here's a proposal. Now, I don't think people will follow it, even if this small podcast somehow reaches everyone who will vote, but it might be worth keeping it in mind. So, vote for a person regardless of their party or ideology. Vote for the second person in my scenario. Vote for someone who does not substitute character for showmanship. Vote for someone who listens and seems genuinely willing to speak with his political opponents. And vote for, and this is a big one, someone who is willing to admit that they were wrong. Now, you don't want someone who's making mistakes all the time, but unless you think our political leaders are infallible and divine, they will be wrong sometimes. Vote for someone who can acknowledge that, even when it is their opponents who are right, and follow the course of actions that really seem the best, even if it makes them look bad. Vote for someone who's concerned with making the world better rather than punishing those who made it worse. In fact, vote for someone who seemed reluctant to identify such people. Now, they will step up when some people need to be held accountable, but they don't relish doing it. You can think of this as an application of something that Jesus taught us in the Gospels. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. How do we want to be treated by people who disagree with us? And I mean something other than them agreeing with whatever we think. If they become leaders of our society and take us to a direction that we disagree with for the next few years, how would we want them to do it? And is your answer for them very, very different from how you would act toward those you disagree with if you or your chosen champions lead our society? Because if then, we have a problem. Okay, here's an interesting exercise. So, think about all of the candidates in your next election cycle from every relevant political party. Now, imagine that all of them hold the same views and policies, and specifically those you disagree with, views and positions of your opponents. An unpleasant thought, I know, but try it anyway. So, take your candidate of choice from your own party. Imagine that everything they support or are fighting for now are those of the other side. And the people they are speaking up against or disparaging or mocking or whatever, they are you. Now, out of all of these candidates who are all championing the issues and policies of the other side, those you disagree with, remember, and are speaking against you, which of these candidates would you respect the most? And which person would treat you with the greatest fairness and respect? Are they still the same person that you were going to vote before? Or now is it some other person? Vote for that person, regardless of their political party or views. But some of us may still object that our views are correct. So we must vote for someone who agrees with our views regardless of their character because it will save our planet from a crisis or our country or because these things were taught to us by God or such. But that's a dangerously arrogant assumption. I mean, aside from the obvious question of whether our views are really correct. Even if they are and will save our planet or a country or these things were taught to us by God or whatever else, can we be confident that the way we go about in following through our supposedly true views are also true? Can we be confident that there weren't any better ways to do so, or that there was still something that we missed? Not that our views were wrong, but that there were more that we needed to learn. And then for Christianity specifically, there is yet another critical issue at stake. And it is something that we explored way back in the first season in the 5th post-season extra episode titled, What Jesus Never Taught Us. And it is this: Christianity has no paradigm, no example for how to politically bring about its goals. In the Christian Gospels, when the devil offered Jesus power over the kingdoms and empires of the world, Jesus refused. Now, we could say that that was only because the devil told Jesus to bow to him, and that's true, but there is far more to it than that. It's about a particular way Jesus would do things, a way that God, his Father, wanted it. So when the Roman governor asked Jesus if he was a king before sentencing him to death, Jesus replied that he was indeed king, but his kingdom is not a kingdom of this world. Otherwise, Jesus specifically added, his followers would be fighting a war to free him. Of course, maybe he said that because Jesus first needed to go to the cross to bring salvation and forgiveness to all human beings, and we'll cover what all of that means quite some time in the future. But see, this is what his disciples thought when they approached Jesus after his resurrection and asked him, Lord, now are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel? Translation, Jesus, now that you've died on the cross, rose again, defeating sin and death, saving us all and stuff, are you now gonna start kicking ass and show those Roman occupiers and corrupt religious leaders what's coming to them and establish a good country? And Jesus basically replied, that's none of your business. But when the Holy Spirit from God comes upon you, you will know what to do. And when that happened, what the disciples did were the same kind of things that Jesus did when he was in this world. Ministry of teaching, healing, and reconciliation while being persecuted and slandered by the powerful. Now, this is not at all to say that Christians cannot hold political office or stand for what they believe in. They can and they should. But it does mean that when Christians hold values or views that are different from the rest of their society, they should be very reluctant of using anything other than persuasion, personal witness, and the act of love to change their society. That bringing about those changes through political power, even if it is legitimate in terms of secular laws, may very well be something that Jesus himself rejected. Then there is another far more relevant criteria for Christianity in choosing any person to be a leader. Again, remember our key point at the beginning of this episode. Examining what kind of person we are is the same as examining how we relate to God and thus to reality as a whole, to truth, and to people around us. And in his letter to the Galatians in the New Testament Bible, Apostle Paul describes the character of those who do this in good faith, which he calls the fruits of the Spirit. He writes, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And this he contrasts with those whose life is characterized by idolatry, strife and enmity, envy, anger, debauchery or greed, sexual immorality, and the like. But the fruits of the Spirit are not traits that are exclusive to Christians. In the letter, Apostle Paul is specifically describing what kind of person we become when our lives are placed in Christ, even if that transformation can be quite long. And again, we could start as horrible people, but Christ will change us. But for our purpose in this episode, we can ask this question. What should be the character of those we are choosing as our leaders, especially if we are Christians? Because the fruits of the Spirit is not conservatism, fiscal responsibility, and nationalism, nor should I add progressivism, social welfare, and equity. You may of course argue that such things, whichever it is, derive from these fruits, but even if that's true, they remain derivative. And this question will still confront us. If our views and values are derived from these fruits of the Spirit, why do the champions of these views not embody the actual fruits of the person? And again, I'm not at all saying that our political positions are unimportant, nor am I proposing that our vote should always ignore the views of our candidates. Not at all. I'm proposing something very specific. If our society has turned into a place where our political candidates that we see on our ballot are persons characterized less by love, peace, gentleness, and respect, and more by strife, envy, conceit, and enmity, if our candidates are the worst possible kind of person among those we agree with, then we need to change our voting habit to correct this. So until this is corrected, and only until this is corrected, vote for a person and not a party. And let's be really honest here. Take any real functioning democracy, so say the US, and let's leave aside all the current jokes about that country right now. In the US, there were times when the Democrats held office, and then there were times when the Republicans held office. And so far, at least in the past 100 years or so, the US did not descend into political pogroms, concentration camps, or complete economic or ecological collapse. And that means, as far as political positions and parties go, both sides are, at least in principle, able to govern. And that means that it's safe to at least test out my proposal for a while. In fact, I would even argue that the catastrophes that you're probably worried about will likely come more due to the kind of persons that you elect rather than which party. Remember, a person who is humble, willing to learn, admit their mistake, and listen to the other side regardless of the party will be someone who can respond properly to any incoming disaster that, say, his own party might cause. And we may at this point voice this final concern. Well, final that I can think of on the top of my head right now. What if our candidates start faking these virtues? Faking being respectful, faking being willing to learn, faking humility and peace and kindness. But I respond that in our specific context, that's actually a step toward a better world. And that's because if we've been selecting people who didn't even bother faking those virtues, people who were chosen because they were conceited, angry, contemptuous of their opponents and so on, so that people seeking political office were actually trying to become such people, then a world where people at least pretend to be good is a much better world. It would mean that we at least know where we should be headed toward. It means that we at least know what kind of people are terrible people. And you will tell those who seek power what kind of people they should aim toward, and failing that, at least act as if they are such persons. So the next time you're choosing someone to lead your society or your nation, here is my suggestion once again. Vote for a person rather than a party. But of course, maybe all of this is too idealistic. Maybe it's just a foolish dream. I did say that I don't think people will follow it even if they heard this proposal. But as with every good dream, I think it's at least worth sharing. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe, follow, and rate or review this series. You can also support this series at buymeacoffee.com when you click the link in the episode description that says support the show. And please join me next episode when we wrap up the postseason episodes and lead into our fourth season.